the worst offender seems to be gas stoves. Even when the stove is off, it's releasing trace amounts of methane and other gases into your home, and it's responsible for a double-digit percentage of asthma cases in the country.
Welcome back to the Clean Techies podcast, where we interview ClimateTech founders and VCs to discuss all things building and investing to solve the biggest challenge of our generation, climate change. This is episode 81 of the show. I'm your host, Silas Maynor. Thank you for joining us on today's episode. Before we get into the details of the episode today, a quick note for any founders listening. If you are a founder in the space seeking funding or looking for partnerships, please do reach out and we will make any intros that we can. And a big thank you to NextWave Partners for sponsoring the show. NextWave are experts in talent acquisition, recruitment, and retention across the climate tech, renewables, and ESG spaces globally. So if your team is growing or you're looking to make a change in your career, please reach out to NextWave at next-wavepartners.com or reach out to one of their consultants directly via their LinkedIn page, and they will be glad to help. All right, let's get into today's episode details. So today we are joined by Dr. Richardson, the co-founder and CEO of Elephant Energy. Dr. started his career in ClimateTech Fund for about 8 years, then eventually left to scratch his entrepreneurial itch and build a climate tech startup. After about 2 years of testing ideas, he and his co-founder Josh Lake ended up landing on Elephant Energy, where they are removing the friction of electrifying homes. So kind of a few things that we talked about on today's show are their product and the benefits of having their product. An interesting one that I found in that section was the health benefits of what they're doing. We talked about how they got started, the challenges of being a climate tech founder. We also talked about his experience fundraising for the company. I think that could be interesting for people seeking fundraising. And then we talked about the talent challenges as well. I think it's important. This was pretty interesting how important blue collar work is in and the challenges of making it attractive. So I think that was a really interesting dichotomy he faces with kind of bringing a white collar and a blue collar workforce together to try to make it really, really great products and make it a very frictionless experience for homeowners. And then we also spoke about his outlook on the future for that and for the kind of sector of blue collar work and how can it be made attractive again, given how necessary it is for us. And then we also spoke about how you don't need to be a technical person to found a climate tech startup, which I think is probably inspiring to a lot of people. So anyways, really, really fun episode and hopefully an inspiration to those without a technical background who are motivated to build a business and want to help reverse climate change in the meantime. So without further delay, let's get into the show. All right, Dr. Welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
Awesome. I'm great. Thanks, Silas. How are you?
I can't complain. It's as we were talking slightly before the show, it's the weather maybe not ideal for most people. Consider New York to be a cold place, but coming from Wisconsin, I find it pretty enjoyable at this time of year. So anyways, let's get right into things. I guess why don't we just start out with talking a little bit about yourself, introduce us to yourself, what you're doing today, and maybe kind of how you got into what you're doing.
Sure. No, thanks for that. So I am Dr. I've started a company called Elephant Energy with a good friend of mine, Josh Lake. Elephant Energy is a home electrification climate tech startup. We're based in the Boulder, Denver area. We electrify homes. So one of the most important things that we have to do as a world from a climate change perspective is electrify homes and buildings more generally. And it's really complicated. It's really hard. And we're trying to build at least the sun run for home electrification. Like I said, we're based in Boulder, Denver. We electrify homes with heat pump water heaters, induction, EV charging, etc. And yeah, it's pretty fun. We're early in. We've been around for about a year and a half, but loving every step of the journey so far.
So how did you ultimately decide that you wanted to do this? Like, what was the impetus for the idea? Because if I'm not mistaken, I know there are some companies out there doing this. I think usually it's probably focused on perhaps just applying solar panels to the roof. But I'm just kind of curious to hear how you decided this and were there other ideas that you scrapped along the way?
Oh, of course. Like any good startup, we've got a million of dead ideas. So I've spent the past 13 years or so in climate tech. For the first 10 years, I was helping build a private equity firm called Vision Ridge Partners, which invests in the energy transition. So we owned EVgo, the fast charge network for electric vehicles. The firm now has a fleet of electric school buses. We own solar projects here in the US and in Japan, and now there's some in Taiwan. So a whole range of different types of sustainable real assets. And I love that work, working closely with entrepreneurs who were building platforms to help decarbonize various sectors of the country and of the world. But after doing that for about a decade, I was sort of missing that entrepreneurial itch of myself. I wanted to be building my own company and opportunity. So I left Vision Ridge and was sort of casting around for a couple of different ideas, and sort of, I'm a framework driven person, and the framework that I sort of stumbled upon through a bunch of conversations and working with different people is really just that we have a couple of things that we need to do over the next 10 years, right? And it's relatively simple and straightforward. We need to deploy a lot more wind and solar. We need to manage the volatility of wind and solar. We need to deploy EVs. And we need to electrify buildings. And if we do those four things, that accounts for the vast majority of emissions. If we don't do those four things, green hydrogen, carbon capture, all these other things that are on the horizon, they're not going to get done on a timeline that works. So really, those first four things that I mentioned are really important and impactful over the next 10 years at least. And as I sort of went through those four things, it sort of felt like, man, the building electrification, how you decarbonize buildings, is the one where there's really, it feels like the laggard. There's not enough money going into it. There aren't enough talented startups going after the opportunity. And I'd had this good friend, Josh, who I've worked together a couple of times over the years. We worked together our very first jobs out of college. He was our COO at one of our portfolio companies at Vision Ridge, an incredibly talented, operationally minded guy who has a very strong complementary background to my own. And so we sort of felt like, man, this is the opportunity to go after. So we started a year and a half ago. We threw a bunch of different ideas against the wall. What we're building now at Elephant is the one that saw the best product market fit. But we certainly have our fair share of failures along the way.
Mm-hmm. So what were, I guess, maybe some of the process of how, especially with something like this, because I don't know, would you classify this business as mostly a service business or as a hardware business?
It's not a hardware business. It's somewhere in between a tech-enabled services business and a software business.
Okay.
Right.
So
go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, like, because of this nature of this business, it's not like strictly software. What was the, I guess, process like to go and check product market fit for your other ideas, and then especially for this one? And why did you decide on this? And like, why was the product market fit there? What were some of the signs that you saw?
So the energy transition fundamentally is an atoms transition. It's a bits enabled transition, but it's an atoms transition. We have to fundamentally replace trillions of dollars of hardware, steel in the ground through all these different sectors. We have to put in solar panels and wind farms. We have to deploy EVs. We have to deploy heat pumps. And so the ideas that always have been more interesting to me are the ones that are really doing that, are really making that atoms level transition. And so for me, the supposition was always that I was going to be doing something on the atoms side of things. My background's not in software. That's not where I would say I have an outstanding ability to build a new venture there. So there's sort of the supposition of how do we build something in the atoms space, where really that's one of the key levers of decarbonization. Some of the other ideas were around how do we provide green electricity to homes? And then once we have that relationship with homes, how do we help consumers make the right choice for their homes around what to electrify, when, and how? And what we found is we had a lot of conversations with homeowners about green electricity, and they kept saying, yeah, it'd be kind of cool if the electricity coming into my home were a little bit greener, but I really want to get a heat pump, and that's really hard. Or I really want induction, and that's hard. And so we kept hearing, it took us a while to really listen to it, but we kept hearing that people were having a different set of problems than the problem we were trying to solve. And so eventually we got to our fixed goals that maybe the problem that we're trying to solve is not the one that customers really want. Instead, there's this whole other problem that they're telling us about. Let's listen to them. So a year ago, January of 2022, we started having conversations with a couple of our friends in the Front Range and said, hey, we're curious. It sounds like it's hard to electrify. Is there something you want to electrify where we could help you? And we immediately had a bunch of people raise their hand, friends of friends, who had said, wow, I want a heat pump. I want a heat pump water heater. I want induction. And so we had our first revenue significantly faster than any other business idea that we tried, and of a much greater magnitude. And the willingness to pay was all there. So all those things started to come together to say, wow, there might be something here to where being a one-stop shop for home electrification is going to generate some real value to customers. And so it's really just sort of that testing and iterating and listening to customers that pulled us in this direction.
Mm-hmm. So a couple of things just to kind of make sure I understood the timing here. Did you had left your role in the private equity to pursue this before you had like the official kind of traction on the idea, correct?
Oh yeah. Yep.
Okay. Yeah, I always find it interesting because I think a lot of people are that I've bumped into are like, hey, debating, what I want to leave, I want to do my own thing, but they just don't know, when the timing is going to be right, et cetera. So I think it's interesting. But then to go back to what you talked about, the revenue being there early. So what is the model that you guys kind of pursue, and how does it work for consumers? Because it sounds like that there was already a want, but perhaps just maybe not the knowledge of how to achieve it from the consumer side.
Yeah, and so the great part is the technology exists, right? So to your question previously about hardware, we don't have to do any innovation on the hardware side. Instead, what we need, what consumers seem to be wanting from us, is this one-stop shop where we go in and we help consumers identify and pull together sort of a roadmap of here's what you should electrify when. You might have a 5-year-old water heater and a 20-year-old furnace. Okay, let's start with the furnace. And or it might be the reverse. You might have a 20-year-old water heater and a 5-year-old furnace. Okay, let's not start with the furnace. Let's start with a water heater. Let's provide you with the most efficient technology. The challenge with electrification is that it's a new product category where you have multiple trades. So heat pump water heater, as an example, you often need an electrician and a plumber. Most often, those are not under the same roof. Most often, the contractor does not know exactly what rebates are available. They don't have access to financing options. So you then, as a customer, you have to tell a plumber a product that they don't really want to sell you. It's much easier for them to put in a new gas water heater. You have to go find an electrician separately. You have to figure out what rebate you can get for what equipment. You have to find out your own financing options. Just every step of the way, there's friction, and that's hard for consumers. And so what we found is, well, we can do all that really easily for customers. We can build systems, we can build tools, we can build software to streamline every piece of this, such that a customer can come to us and say, hey, I have a 20-year-old water heater. I want to replace it. We say, okay, perfect. Here's what you should replace it with. We'll take care of it. Here's the timeline. Here's the cost. Here's all the rebates and financial incentives available for you. And we'll get it done for you without you having to manage or deal with a single contractor. And instead, we provide a big benefit to our customers, which is that we work with a number of vetted contractors. So typically, if you're going to go do a project, right, you might want to go talk to 5, 10 different contractors to figure out who do I trust to do a great job and take care of my home. Instead, we do all that work for our customers. So that vetted contractor model seems to provide them a lot of value.
Yeah, I mean that's pretty interesting. I think that there's probably more and more people in this situation, especially the people who probably would be interested in doing these things in the first place, who just simply don't have time, right? Like it's a lot of work. It's almost like a part-time job to
That's right.
do,
Yeah.
any kind of remodeling on your house or anything, right? So it's like I can't imagine how much work it would go into it. So that's quite interesting. I love seeing these types of situations because it's like you just got to look for it, and you find these opportunities where people like myself, I sometimes am a little bit pessimistic on, hey, like you have to be a scientist to start a climate tech company, basically. And that's not the reality, right? There's plenty of opportunities if you just look for them, right?
That's right.
I want to ask a little bit. I'm just kind of curious. What are the, I guess, for the consumers themselves, other than like lack of hassle to handle these things, does like what are the financial benefits for electrifying their home?
So it depends a little bit on the product. Generally, like super broadly, electric technology is much more efficient. It uses a lot less energy to get the same outcome. So it's typically, if you have to replace something, it's going to be much more efficient to do it with electric technology. But choosing the right electric technology is really important. As an example, when you want to replace a gas furnace and an AC with electric technology, the best way to do that is with a heat pump. Now you can get different brands of heat pumps. Those heat pumps have different efficiencies. You might want a supplemental heat kit, which is basically a large toaster oven or hair dryer. And so you may need to add those depending on the exact specifications of your home. But how big the equipment is in terms of the BTUs that it can provide, whether you have that heat kit, how efficient it is, all those have very large impacts in terms of what your annual operating cost is going to be. So it's really important to choose the right equipment, size it properly for the home, and think about that total cost of ownership. That's not something that your standard consumer really wants to spend much time thinking about, nor is it something that they're really equipped to ask the right questions and make those the best decisions for themselves without someone to really walk them through. Here are the various trade-offs. Here's in terms of upfront costs and ongoing costs, etc. So long story short, electric technology is way more efficient as long as you design the system properly for the exact specifications of the home. Especially with gas prices over the past couple of years, which have really doubled or tripled in many areas, consumers are going to see savings
Mm-hmm.
for replacing their furnace, for replacing their water heater, for replacing their gas stove with an induction.
Yeah, and I think that makes a lot of sense. I mean, obviously, it's a process that people are starting to get the hang of it and start to kind of take on to this idea. One thing I feel like is probably relevant here. I'm not totally sure. Is what about the quality, mainly from a health perspective? Like, what are the health benefits if you know of any for having a home that's run on electric equipment?
Yeah, so that's been the really interesting things. So when we started this business, we sort of thought, okay, there's a very clear climate impact, there's a good cost impact, and then there's two really interesting things that we've learned over the past year that we didn't realize before. One is that electric technology is actually a lot more comfortable. So a heat pump, as an example, is going to run at a much lower average temperature when it's providing heating. But that means that it actually is flowing, the air is flowing through your ducts much more regularly, which provides a much more even heating and cooling across your building. So in a lot of homes, when we talk to customers, they might have really cold bedrooms or something that's really far away from the ductwork, might be super cold in the winter, super hot in the summer. But by having a heat pump, you actually get better airflow. So you get a much more comfortable heating and cooling experience. The other part, as you mentioned, is air quality. Well, when you're combusting gas in a home, we're just now realizing, and I think some very smart people realized this probably decades ago, but the rest of us are just catching on. Well, guess what? It has a bunch of bad side effects in terms of um, basically releasing poisons into your air. The worst offender seems to be gas stoves. Even when the stove is off, it's releasing trace amounts of methane and other gases into your home, and it's responsible for a double-digit percentage of asthma cases in the country. Um, Furnaces, water heaters, in theory, they're sealed combustion. Very oftentimes they're not when you bring air quality monitors into people's homes, and the data's not always super exciting. So the switch to electric technology has had these two huge side benefits in terms of comfort and air quality indoors, which yeah, we didn't know about a year ago, but we are super excited for all of
Mhm.
our customers who are electrifying.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. And anytime you challenge the status quo, sometimes like when you do get to the other side of it, you're like, wow, like why didn't we think of that sooner? Like that
Right,
should have been
right.
pretty obvious. But could you speak just a little bit to the integration process for, for somebody who signs up for this service? Like what does the timeline look like? How seamless is it, et cetera?
Yeah, so it really depends on a number of different factors. our goal as a business is to create the best customer experience that we can. And for some customers, that's going to mean, hey, I need to replace my gas furnace with a heat pump, and I need to do that in the next week. And so we can do that. It's a little bit of a scramble, but it's totally possible. For other customers that, we've had some customers last year who said, look, I'm very interested in getting a heat pump water heater. My water heater is old. It doesn't need to be replaced tomorrow. So in fact, I want to wait for the best financially opportune time to do so. And you've probably heard about the Inflation Reduction Act, but it's the passed into law last year. It's the single largest investment in the U.S.'s climate infrastructure ever. It's a massive green, it's not the Green New Deal, but it accomplishes many of the same things. And there's a huge amount of tax credits and rebates that are coming out this year and next year as a result of that. So we have some customers who signed up with us last year who are just getting installs this year because they wanted to wait for the best financial outcome for them in their home. So short story, we can do some of these projects in as quick as a week. Sometimes it takes many months if you're trying to optimize the financial outcome for your home.
Yeah, interesting. I think obviously that ability to be flexible is quite interesting. I think a lot of people they want to hear that there's maybe perhaps a one key way to do everything, but there's a lot of different situations that people need to be flexible to. I think flexible business models are hard to run sometimes because of the operational challenge, but it's obviously quite beneficial for customers. One thing I'm just kind of curious about is on your model is how do you hire internally all these contractors, or do you work a lot with these external kind of a network of them? And then if that is the case, are there benefits to contractors? Because you mentioned earlier that they might not want to install these things, and then perhaps they have a change of heart after they see how these things work. I'm just kind of curious to see if there's any shift you see there.
Yeah, no, those are a great set of questions. So right now, our model is to work exclusively with vetted contractors. We do a lot of work upfront to vet our partners who are in the field. We spend a lot of time diligencing them, understanding their systems, understanding their processes, understanding their experience level, especially with the equipment that we are asking them to install. We have a rigorous commissioning process and feedback loop with those contractors. So every install, we're hopefully making them a little bit better as we collectively are on a path for improvement. And so that's our model right now. There's some huge benefits for that model. There's also some challenges, so stay tuned. We may be thinking about is that the right long-term business model? But in the short run, that's certainly the business model. And the benefit for the contractors has been pretty interesting. Right now, most contractors are really, really good at installing projects. What they're not necessarily great at is finding new customers, figuring out which equipment qualifies for which rebate, working with different trades. So if you're an HVAC contractor, you don't have electrical in-house most likely. So if a customer wants a heat pump, that's kind of a pain for you to then go coordinate that with a different electrician. Supply chain is really challenging for a lot of contractors. And so what we found is our platform really enables them to focus on the things that they are really good at doing and get paid for that at a great rate, and not spend any time on the things that they're not great at in terms of that customer service, in terms of that equipment, supply chain work, answering questions about rebates and financial incentives. We make their lives a lot easier with our platform and with these installs. So that's the benefit that we've been sussing out so far is reliable income with way less overhead. Like I said, there's some challenges to that model. We're working through them and trying to figure out if this is the right model for scale. But
yeah, I always find it interesting because I come from obviously from Wisconsin, and I grew up working for my dad in his cabinet shop, and I've interfaced with a lot of kind of blue collar workers, and I usually I know the tendency, like they have a lot of like their kind of things and how they run their businesses, and it's more so that they're tradespeople, like they know how to do what they do, and they're usually very good at it, but they may not be great at customer relations or other things like that, right? So I think I really find it fascinating when you kind of fuse these two things together, because it is a challenge, but there's a lot of benefits to be had when people do what they do best and then kind of leave the rest to somebody else.
That's right.
Out of curiosity, this might, I'm not sure if you have thoughts on this or not, but do you foresee that when we go back to thinking about the health benefits of having an electrified home, do you think that at some point insurance companies will start to pick up on this when they're, giving out rates either for like health insurance or life insurance, things like that? Is this something that you foresee or have any kind of run-ins with as you've been building this out and noticing those benefits?
Haven't run into that yet in terms of insurance companies being more thoughtful about the health risks associated with uh, methane burning appliances in people's homes, but it feels like they're one of the insurance industry in theory, I think, should be one of the smartest uh, groups out there in terms of understanding uh, well, as you said, the health impacts of a lot of this stuff. So I wouldn't be surprised if they're starting to think about it and
Mm-hmm.
understand how that then filters into risk for them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it'd be interesting. I mean, I think if I'm not mistaken, I believe Tesla ended up creating their own insurance company because of the fact that they could have better data, on safety and things like that. So I wouldn't be surprised if this starts to play a role. I worked in insurance in the past, so I had some kind of insight into what they did. It would be interesting. Um, Very cool. Well,
Yeah,
let's shift
agreed.
let's shift over a little bit more to the kind of experience of building the company. So we talked about already how you came across the technology. One thing I did want to make sure we understood was you mentioned that you left your kind of your day job, if you will, to pursue a startup in climate tech. You didn't know what it was yet, and you were testing things. What was the time from leaving to when you actually settled on the idea for Elephant Energy? What was that timing? How many iterations? It is not even how many iterations, but that timing before you really settled on something.
Yeah. So the I think the full timeline was about 2 years. So I left Vision Ridge in 2019. I took about 6 months off where I intentionally did not want to work. I was lucky enough to be able to do that. I had a partner who was very supportive, just sort of wanted to take a little bit of a reset and make sure that I was really going to be doing next in life, the thing that I wanted to be doing most. And then I spent the next year and a half working on a bunch of different ideas, not just Elephant Energy, but worked with a group where we got a ARPA-E grant to do some carbon capture and sequestration work, worked on some early stage development for large utility scale behind the meter renewables. So really wanted to cast a wide net to figure out, as an investor, it was incredibly rewarding to work closely with entrepreneurs. But then once you think about the entrepreneurial, the actual operating side of things, there's a million different forms that entrepreneurship can take. Project development looks very, very different than a manufacturing company, which looks very, very different than a tech-enabled services business, which looks very different than a software company. And so I wanted to throw a wide net and really understand what was going to provide me the most intellectual fulfillment and personal gratification, I guess I'd say. So I spent about 2 years working with a couple different groups. It was really fun to explore a bunch of different angles. And all that work is really what led to Elephant, sort of that opportunity to test a bunch of different things and learn more about myself and what was going to be the right fit for me and what did I get most excited about to wake up to every morning. Plus, there was COVID, and that always
Mm-hmm.
is a little bit of a rocky. That was a rocky road for everyone. So,
Mm-hmm.
um,
Yeah. How did your time in private equity inform your decision making process? Because I would assume that there might have been some level of, if you do due diligence for a living, you're going to do due diligence before you start a business, right? So I'm just kind of
mhm.
curious what that experience, how that informed your decision making process and starting Elephant.
So the thing that has been absolute core to Elephant and is a direct learning from my experience in private equity is just the importance of unit economics. So there's lots of businesses that can be built that are exceptionally unprofitable for a very long period of time. Those businesses, sometimes you get through the growth curve and you figure out how to make them profitable. But for me, based on sort of my personal risk tolerance, based on my view of the world, I really wanted to be building a business that had strong positive unit economics from day one. Because in my view, right, cash is king. If you control your cash flow, you control your ability to weather different macroeconomic cycles. And so the things that I was attracted to always had a unit economic story that required very little upfront investment, and instead was much more of a get to product market fit, control your destiny, and then throw fuel on the fire in the areas where you see, well, where you see that fire burning. And you only have the capacity to do that if you can control your own destiny and control it via cash directly. So I don't know if that answers your question, Silas, but
Yeah, it is quite interesting. I think I like the focus on the ability to actually survive on your own fuel, essentially. I think the thing that I was always interested in watching unfold is how climate tech companies, I think, so I should say climate tech startups seem to be a little bit more on average responsible on building, because they had a focus. Like, it was very, usually, I'm assuming at some points it's very difficult to raise funding, so they had to make sure they used it better, right? Whereas the traditional, just like a software startup, it was just, get more customers and show traction and get some cool ideas and you'll raise another round, right?
right,
And
right.
I think that time has passed, I think, even for traditional tech. So I think it's a really good maturing moment. But I do think it's interesting. um and this is, I guess, one thing I want to understand is, as well as, once you got started, what were what was the process like for fundraising? I'm kind of curious to understand where you're at in that process. Like, how hard was it to get money? How many pitches? I think a lot of people get really frustrated because it's difficult, obviously. But maybe some of your advice to others for that process, and then some of your experiences there, and the way you look at it. Perhaps if you do it differently than most do.
Yeah, sure. So fundraising is interesting. It is, I had been on the other side of lots of fundraisers, so I sort of understood the process decently well at a high level. And I've, interacted with enough entrepreneurs to sort of know that at the end of the day, there's two things that really matter. One is how wide a net that you're casting. And then there's three things that matter. One is how wide a net you're casting. B is how much luck you have on your side. And C is um, you just need one yes. And it was incredibly eye-opening to live through all three of those on my own, on the other side of the table, as it were. So I consider myself super fortunate. I spent 10 years in private equity, building a network of everybody who's investing in climate tech. There's been a bunch of new funds over the past 5 years. And so I knew, but, had a deeper LinkedIn network of most investors than most entrepreneurs when they're at our stage. So I felt like I had a really great platform by which I could be reaching out to investors and reforming that relationship and talking to them. But the reality is not a single one of those investors that I knew previously wrote the check and said it was somebody that we didn't know, which is sort of point one. You got to cast that net really, really wide. B, it just takes one. And I think we had, I don't know, about 70 no's, and it just takes one. And I think that's the math that almost every seed company sees, is it's going to be something around 75 pitches, and you just need one. There are stories in Silicon Valley, of course, of doing 5 pitches and getting 5 term sheets, but that seems to be rarer and rarer these days, especially outside Silicon Valley. So we sort of knew we had a long road ahead of us. It was eye-openingly hard to get that much rejection. I feel like I've got a pretty thick skin, but after your 60th no, you start to really question some things about yourself and your business. And then I'll just go back to luck. I think we started our fundraise in April of last year, and it took us about 4 to 5 months to get to a term sheet and close. And it's a really tough fundraising market, and I consider ourselves incredibly lucky to have been able to pull, I don't know if it's a rabbit out of the hat, but to be able to partner with a group like Building Ventures on this round. Just incredibly fortunate, incredibly lucky. So those three things are sort of what stick out to me from the fundraise.
Yeah, I think it's kind of interesting. I mean, looking at your experience, you would perhaps assume that it would have been easier because you understood it and you had that network. But again, like it's kind of like all bets are off essentially. I
Yeah,
am
that's right.
curious at this point, knowing that you worked there for some time in private equity. Was there a point earlier on when you were there where you're like, hey, you know what? I really don't like doing this. I'd rather go build something. And you really like, did you ever have this internal struggle about like, should I stay or should I go? And maybe you stayed because you thought it would benefit you in the long run, but perhaps it didn't.
Here's what I'd say about that, which is I am perhaps loyal to a fault sometimes. And I believe strongly in not sort of having one foot in the door, one foot out the door. So in my very first job out of college, where I worked with Josh, we both worked in a strategy consulting job, and we both left after working there for about a year and a half, 2 years, because we wanted to pursue careers in climate science. And um, I won't speak for Josh, but I sort of felt very strongly then and continue to like, I want to move on from the thing that I'm doing and not waste their time or money and instead go actually make a run at something. I think finding an opportunity and testing and iterating, it's a full-time job. It's not something you can do that I felt like I could do on nights and weekends. Some people might be lucky enough or smart enough to do that, but I found it's much more elbow grease
Mhm.
of a full-time thing to be doing that.
Yeah, interesting. I think that it is something that a lot of people talk about, like side hustles and stuff like that. And I'm
Yeah,
sure there are probably some examples. I just don't feel like Climate Tech has a whole lot of side hustle opportunities. It's gonna be gotta be a full-time thing. Which I mean, there's another problem that can arise is that some people just can't afford that, right? They have to provide for
yep,
their
totally.
families, so they can't take that opportunity, unfortunately. But I do think it's interesting to see that perspective, and probably there's a lot of compounding results when you are just focused on one thing and you're really,
Mm-hmm.
really dedicated to that thing. So I think that's interesting perspective. Um, I am kind of curious, a lot of people, obviously you're doing, it seems like, the company's doing very, very well and things are, there's probably challenges here and there still, but usually people like a good story and they like to see the successes, but could you maybe tell any stories about if there was times where you were like, oh man, things are going wrong. I don't know if this is the right thing. Like some of those times, kind of like the Elon Musk story of how they almost went bankrupt, like anything like that you want to share with people so that they understand like the challenges behind getting to where you get.
Well, like I say this with the benefit of hindsight, but we had, I don't know, 3 or 4 different business model ideas before we went with the one that we're working on now. And it's incredibly humbling to say, hey, I've been working in climate tech for a decade. I've been working at one of the larger, more successful private equity companies. I've worked with some of the most successful entrepreneurs out there. And I know exactly what it is I'm going to build. And then to bring that vision to customers and just basically get apathy, it sucks. And so it's a real, uh, yeah, there's a good amount to start a company to want to change the world. You have to have some hubris. You have to believe that you can come up with a better idea than other people to do something that nobody else has figured out yet. And then you also have to be humble enough to listen to customers and say, am I going down the right path? Is what I'm building actually delivering real value to customers? And I think the fun part of where we are as a company is that we are demonstrating product market fit. We do have a pretty cool number of customers who are huge advocates and really excited about what we're doing. We haven't really spent any money on marketing historically. It's all been word of mouth. So that's all incredibly rewarding and gratifying. And yet it also came through, I don't know, close to a year of beating our head against the wall and trying different business model ideas and just being overcoming those failures one after another.
Mhm. Yeah, well, I'm kind of curious if you have a framework for that mental game of going back and forth. Like, yes, this is right. Like, because I mean, some people might be like, I know what we're doing is right, and you can't keep on the path. You might even ignore customers, but then you have to kind of mix this together. Like, that's a big mental gymnastics. Do you have a framework and any tactics that other founders can use to try to make sure that they're balancing that correctly and knowing when to actually ask themselves, hey, should I change the direction here?
I think it's interesting. The hard part for us is our first couple of business model ideas. I think we did a pretty good job interviewing a bunch of prospective customers. We talked to hundreds of people and we explained our value proposition. They said, wow, that sounds awesome. I'd love that. They said, great, sign up here and pay us for it. And the actual then conversion was very, very low. So I think we learned a lot about the difference between intention and then somebody willing to put down their credit card. And so I think that's for us what's been something that we've tried to follow is you can get all sorts, and I think this is sort of obvious, but you can get all sorts of people saying, yeah, I'm totally into what you're building. and it's really only when they put down their credit card and say, I will pay you for what you're building, that you learn whether you have something that's of true value to them. So go ahead.
Yeah, no, I think it's fascinating. I mean, one book a mentor of mine had me read at one point. It's called The Mom Test, I think, and it talks about doing that where because if you ask certain people, they're probably just going to say, yeah, you got a great idea, or maybe they even are genuinely like excited about it. But it's like doing that testing of will somebody actually give me their credit card details, even if I'm not going to charge them for anything real yet. Like, will they actually buy that $1 widget or whatever?
Yeah.
I think something I try to think about, and I hope that I'm sure there's plenty of good solutions out there for climate tech startups to find that, especially when they're in hardware, right? There's like massive upfront investment. Is to find ways to test it before you go after it, because you got to figure out that if there's going to be somebody to buy it on the other end once the manufacturing is done, right? And that bill's been paid. What about talent? What is talent like from either internal or the contractor's perspective? Like, what are your thoughts on the challenges there, and how do you look for it? Is college education important, et cetera?
So we're in a semi-unique space where we have two very different types of talents that we need to succeed at Elephant Energy, right? The first one is your standard corporate, or standard from yours and my background, standard, call it white collar work, sales, operations, software, project management, finance, et cetera. Many of the sort of white collar opportunities that we know. We also are building a function that requires very heavily skilled in-field labor, much more of a blue collar type work. That's across electrical and plumbing and HVAC and drywall, all sorts of different trades that we find ourselves in. So the talent pool for both of those is very, very different. Talent pool for white collar workers is great in that we're at a point where climate tech is incredibly in vogue. There's lots of people who want to transition their careers into climate. We're also at a place of close to peak employment. So finding people is very tough, even though people want to get into this space. And then there's a whole different ballgame on the blue collar side of things, where climate change is less of a aspirational top 5 thing that people are working towards in their lives. It's much more about ensuring that there's food on the table, ensuring that they're producing a great outcome for whatever trade that they're in. And it's very different in terms of how you hire, how you source talent. And, like I said, we're not hiring blue collar internally, but we are working closely with our partners to ensure that they're sufficiently staffed and trained to be able to service the volume of projects that we have coming down the pipeline for them. So that's broadly, it's two very different talent games, if that makes sense. And then, within the various aspects, you have all the same hiring challenges as you would at any other company. Sales, how you hire and screen for sales looks very, very different than how you hire and sales for project management, but that's not new or unique to you at all, I'm sure.
Yeah, no, it's pretty common. I'm always fascinated by the blue collar side of things, because I think that coming from that kind of background growing up, they just, like you said, there's no necessarily interest in trying to like get into climate per se. Maybe
Yeah,
there is some sort of underlying, but that's definitely not their key focus.
right.
Um, and I find it interesting to see, how you guys will continue to do that and try to source these people. Um, I'm assuming at some point they start to maybe kind of transfer over to see like, hey, this is how it's going. But there's another side of it, which is companies like yours are doing a quite interesting job of upskilling people into climate, because there's a lot of these blue collar workers that are probably deciding on how they vote based off of what they think their job security is, right? Because a lot of times the unfortunate truth is that innovation can sometimes bring change, which people may not know how to deal with, right? And they're just
Yep.
afraid. So I think it's an interesting challenge that we have to face and like kind of collectively work together as a country to solve those things as that transition takes place.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, and to your point, right? Uh, um, a lot of the people within Elephant Energy, they think of themselves as climate um, workers. They're climate workers. They put their careers and jobs towards climate, but they work in sales, they work in operations, they work in
mhm,
software. And yet, all of the installers, the people who are actually doing the work to install heat pumps and heat pump water heaters, they don't see themselves as climate workers. They're a plumber, they're an HVAC contractor. So it's
mhm.
I think you bring up a fascinating point, and the trades will be really interesting to see how it evolves because there is a massive labor shortage within the trades. Um, there are not enough skilled workers, electricians, plumbers, HVAC, and yet for the climate transition to happen, we need to bring many more, millions more workers into those trades, and it doesn't necessarily need to be pitched as a climate job, but at the end of the day, it is a climate job. So it's sort of a fascinating macroeconomic uh, trend that we'll be seeing, I think, which will be interesting to
Yeah,
observe it.
I just honestly don't know how we can make it happen without the tradespeople, and I think that
Right? No, we can't.
the trades are considered to be kind of like unsexy at this point. But it's like I do wonder that if there's a role for climate tech, which is usually very closely related to kind of this ESG in general, which is the S part of that, so focusing on the employees and other things
Mm-hmm.
around the social side. But if there's a way to elevate the kind of the blue collar workers to a status where it's actually something that many people are more excited to be, right? They can make a better living than they
Mm-hmm.
would formerly, right? And I think that I really do see the climate tech, and I guess you could say revolution, if you will, as playing a role in making it sexy again, if you will, or making it
Yeah.
something that's desirable that people want to go towards, right? And then they're not trying to escape, the life of their parents, for example, right? So I think
Right.
it is a really big challenge, and I'm fascinated to see how
Yeah.
it plays out.
Yeah. I think you're completely right, and I think the group My Climate Journey has been doing a really interesting set of work around interviewing particularly skilled laborers in the climate transition. And it's been sort of fascinating to hear a lot of their stories who, I think it's a very small but growing percentage of workers who do see themselves as enabling the climate transition. And you're absolutely right. We can't do it without a much larger, more focused group of blue collar workers. And so continuing to surface those stories and continuing to give meaning to it, I think can only benefit us.
Mhm. Yeah, there's one other thing that does come to mind, especially with rural, like for example, rural Wisconsin, right? There's a lot of these people who aren't, there are parts of the country that are not focused on white collar jobs, but those people
Totally.
are the same people who tend to be very, very skeptical of climate change because they say, oh, that's just gonna, take away jobs. And if you can prove that that's not the case, and we're conscious of that, and we're making it better for the future, actually. And of course, who doesn't want a cleaner, more healthy environment, right? I know
Mm-hmm.
a lot of these factories are not exactly the greatest places to spend, 8 or 9 hours a day. So yeah, sure. I'm sure that'll change. I hope to see what happens there. I know we're running out of time here. I do want to talk a little bit just about your outlook on the future for this space in particular, maybe climate in general, just kind of key things that you're excited for, or perhaps challenges that need to be solved now that the challenge you're solving has been done. Like, what are some things that you see coming down the pipeline?
I certainly wouldn't say that the challenge that home electrification is anywhere close to solved. I mean, that's one of the opportunities, I think, in this space is I think there will be many billion-dollar companies built over the next 10 years in this space. Hopefully we'll be one of them. But look, I think broadly speaking, climate, it's sort of a fascinating time to be in climate. There's never been this much interest and focus on it. There's never been so much tangible connection between people's understanding of climate change and flooding in California and wildfires in California and climate change and sort of that vicious cycle that we're in from an environmental disaster perspective. And I think that's galvanizing a lot of people to work, and that's exciting. The other exciting thing is that a lot of people are starting to see the fact that any job can be a climate job. I think historically, there was a perception of, oh, to get into climate, I have to learn a new set of skills. And that is incredibly difficult if you're anywhere beyond a couple of years deep in your career. But I think the reality is that every job can be a climate job. And that is slowly starting to change minds around, okay, I'm mid-career. It's too late for me to put my career towards climate change. Well, no, that's not actually true. And I think people are starting to understand that and recognize that. So I think that's all very exciting. I think the challenge that we still have is it still feels incredibly nebulous for many people of what impact and what needs to be done from a climate change perspective. I think, I sort of laid out at the beginning of the conversation sort of how I see the world. There are definitely other frameworks. But the reality is we sort of know what we have to do over the next 10, 20 years. And it's relatively straightforward stuff. It's not rocket science. It's very simply meat and potatoes. And so I think all those things sort of get me really excited about the future of climate. But that does not in any way mean that we don't have a massive amount of progress, right? I think we just all probably saw the news today that 2022 emissions were the highest on record. So for all of our talk and for all of our progress, we're still not making enough progress. So there's a little bit of yin and yang going on, some positives and some negatives, but overall, I'm incredibly optimistic about the opportunities ahead of us as a business. I'm incredibly opportunistic about all the attention around climate and climate change, and I'm incredibly excited about all the talent that wants to be transitioning their careers and be putting their formidable skills into something a little bit bigger than themselves. It's all very exciting to me.
Yeah, you can't exactly talk climate change away. You have to do something about it. You can't just write software to reverse climate change. So I think
that's right.
Like the ending of this conversation, talking about the tradespeople, like if most of these solutions are there, that it's just a matter of deployment. I think that's really fascinating, hopefully for a lot of people who maybe are not technical, people who want to build something that it's really just about the commercials and the operational aspects. Like, can you make this happen and can you do it quickly and do it efficiently? That's right. Exciting times, obviously a lot on the balance, but exciting times for many people. Where, to close things off, where can people reach you? What is your ask of the audience?
Yeah. So check us out at elephantenergy.com. Would love any and all engagement from the community. Always happy to chat electrification or chat climate careers. What's the ask? The ask is to start thinking about your own home. Think about the roadmap. I don't think people should be fully electrifying all in one go. I think people need to take stock of where they are, where their homes are, and just think about what is the replacement cycle for their homes over time, right? Like nobody really drives their car until it dies on the side of a freeway. You sort of start to understand, oh, maybe my car's aging, maybe I should sell it and get a new one. But yet that's how we treat the assets in our home. And so my ask of you, dear listener, would be to take some time to take stock of how old your assets are. Make sure you aren't caught flat-footed, because when you're caught flat-footed, you install gas, and that's not what we need to do from a climate change perspective.
Very great. Awesome. This is a great conversation. Thanks so much for coming on, and really excited to see what you guys continue to do.
Yeah, thanks so much for the time, Silas. Really appreciated the conversation as well.
All right, thanks for listening to today's episode. If you enjoyed it, please do share it with somebody who might find it interesting, as of course we put a lot of effort into this, and to get the maximum benefit for other people, we would really appreciate that you share with somebody who could find it interesting and value out of it. And then if you enjoyed the episode, we always appreciate a review, as it helps grow the reach of the show. Do connect with DR and check out their website, the Elephant Energy website, to learn more about what they're doing. If this is your first time, of course, we ask that you subscribe and tap the bell for notifications as well. A quick note on our next episode: we will be speaking with Olivia Penderson, the founder and CEO of Susteo. They are building a platform that helps you collect rewards for reducing your carbon impact. So it's kind of similar to a personal ESG score in some way, but the really interesting thing is how this creates essentially a signal from consumers that corporates can read and adjust their future product launches to be more sustainable. It was really interesting how she said there were so many people who have already been looking for this type of software, people who want to have this. But it's most likely that corporates were not necessarily super aware of this, probably in some ways, but just really interesting what they're doing. I think you'll enjoy the episode a lot. So a really fun conversation coming up on Friday. So stay tuned for that. And thanks again for joining us on Clean Techies, the podcast. We will see you next time.